Howdy folks. I want to put together a quick little video here about working with functions. Functions are sort of the core tool that we use in programming to organize our code. They're a little different than functions we might have run into in math class, in the sense that in C++ functions, sure, they let us do some things with input and output, kind of like a mathematical function, but their real purpose is to help us organize blocks of code by naming them, giving them name code, and instead of typing out all that code, we can just say, hey, here's the name of that block of code, run it now. And so that really saves us a lot of time. For instance, if we want to take the square root of the number, it's really nice if we can just write square root of something instead of having to figure out the algorithm to do the square root, which I'm sure no one knows off the top of their head. So what does it look like? So this is kind of a program that I put together that's kind of a variation on that adding program we did in video 1. And you'll notice a couple of different things. So first of all, you'll notice that I added a new thing above the main. So you'll notice the main here, this is kind of where we wrote all of our program before, and now there's a new thing up here. And what this is this is called the function declaration. It's basically telling our compiler that we're going to make up something on our own, right? So we're going to make a new word, kind of like when we make a variable, right? So like here we make a variable and we're telling the compiler, like, hey, look, this is a name of something. You did not expect me to call anything first number. Now you know, anytime you see first number, let's use it. Same thing goes with functions. In this case, I made a function called adding machine, and it has 3 parts. One, it has this thing called a return type. So this function has an integer return type, which means it's going to send an integer back after it runs. Basically, any variable can be the return type for a function, which is nice. Or if it's not going to return anything at all, like let's say it's just going to print out some cout statements and do nothing else, then we call it a void. And so you'd write like void win message or something like that, and maybe it would take in a string. So what did I do right there? You'll notice that there's the name, that's important, and then inside the parentheses are the inputs that's going to take. So my adding machine, if you remember before, I was just adding 2 numbers together. So I made a function that's going to take in number 1 and number 2. Now in the declaration, we don't have to give them names. You can if you want, but really you're just saying, I'm going to have a variable of type integer and a variable of type integer. Separate them with a comma for each one of your things. You can have as many inputs as you want, but you can only have one output. There's some tricks for getting around that, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So right now, just think about one output. Or no outputs, void, no outputs. Here's a function called win message, and it takes in a string as a thing. So we'll get rid of that one for now because we're just going to talk about our adding machine, and we can talk about voids at another time. So let's just see how the main changed. These all look the same, right? First number, second number, get some user input, we have a sum, we print out a message, but this is where we sort of start to get different, is that we have we wrote the name of our function and then we said send it first number and send it second number. So what this is happening here is this is actually a placeholder for, well, whatever our function happens to do. So let's go take a look at what it does. So this is basically, at some point, it's going to run some code off to the side. It's going to finish, and then whatever the result is, it's going to put it into sum. So let's see what's happening in the function. So if I scroll down, I'm going to put our function definition. So definition is actually where all the code associated with a function goes. So you'll notice some things kind of look the same. Notice this right here matches very closely with this right here. It's actually got to be the same. So the return type matches up. Int. Okay, name, adding machine matches up. And then here, I'm actually giving names to the variables that are involved in this function. So in this case, I have integer, and I just called it n1 and n2 for number 1 and number 2. Now, the tricky thing is here is you'll notice that I like what's going on with these things. This is it's just saying if you pass me values, the value that goes in this spot, I'm just going to call n1 for the duration of the function. The value that you send me in this spot, I'm just going to call n2. It's just kind of a temporary thing. It's sort of like the value gets copied into this, and this guy only lives inside the function. So that lets you use your function on lots and lots of different numbers, right? I could do adding machine on, A and B, and then I could do it on first number and second number. And each time the function sort of got run, it would say, okay, I don't really care what they're called. It's just going to be n1 right now, n2 right now, and then I'll send you back the answer because that's really all you care about. Okay? So here we have total, just kind of like our sum. We made a new variable, and it's going to take the value of those and add them together. A little cout statement to remind us what it did, and then we're going to return the total. So this return statement, this is sort of ends the function. If you get to a return statement, your function's over and done with, and it basically takes whatever variable you put after it and sends it back to the program. So when we get here and we run adding machine, it runs all the code, adds this together, prints out these values, and then it sends back total. Well, that value of total gets copied into sum. And so now I can print it in. Okay? And I can ask for the user number, then I can find the new sum, right? I sent in sum and user number. That gets copied in, and now I can print it out. So let's run it and see if that behaves as we expect. So the sum of 5 and 17 is 22. Well, please enter a number, and I will add it to 22. Hey, let's add 25. The sum of 22 and 25 is 47. Wow, I'm so happy my total is now 47. So I did exactly what we expected. So again, just to quickly recap, we're always going to have a function declaration, and we're going to have our function definition here. We're going to run code. The idea behind functions is it's just going to help us organize our code into smaller bytes. So I can, if I'm writing a really big program, I might have, lots and lots of different functions that do some things. Like if I'm making a game, I might, have something that checks to see if I collide with the enemy, updates the, hit points of my character, or draw something to the screen. These are all going to be little blocks of code, and instead of just sort of having a giant pile of C++ code that's sort of unlabeled, I can now organize it by saying, hey, here's a little block of code that does this. Here's a little block of code that does this. We're going to get really, really good at using functions to help organize our code to make it easier to read. So we can make our programming look a little bit more like English, and that'll make it easier for other people to help us out, and also help us break down more complicated problems. So hopefully that was a good bit of information, and we'll see you later. Bye.